You're listening to Power Athlete Radio, a podcast dedicated to empowering your performance every damn day. Join former NFL pro and Power Athlete founder John Welborn as he dissects the greatest minds in strength, conditioning, and more. So whether your goal is to be the hammer, destroy mediocrity, or simply move the dirt, you've come to the right place. Now with the warm-up done, let the gains begin.
Hey, Power Athlete Nation. We have a podcast, and I don't say this lightly when I say this is the shit. We have Dr. Sabine Hazan. She's a doctor out in California and one of the top researchers for the gut biome, and asking a ton of questions and doing the research on not only how to make a more dynamic, more diverse, more robust gut, but how to make us healthier and just more resilient as we go through life. We get into everything from how bifidobacteria is affected, from everything from the environment to food to vaccines. I mean, it's really an amazing dynamic conversation. She's having a big event in Malibu on August 10th that we talk about, where she's bringing in the top researchers on the gut biome and hoping to educate doctors and the attendees on how to live your best life, healthiest life, and really just be able to get through what we're seeing in this health crisis. So buckle up. This one's the shit. How many people are actively doing research? I mean, kind of like to the degree you're doing it, instead of just like kind of in vitro in a lab kind of existing. I mean, yours is dynamic in that you're working with people, not just in the sterile environment.
Not just rats and mice.
Yeah.
So it started off, research I think starts in the lab in a petri dish and then moves on to animals and then goes on to humans. I'm in the human part. I've always been doing clinical research with pharma and enrolling patients for clinical trials. I changed my route when I started seeing on my desk clinical trials of fecal material in capsules. And I said, we're in the fecal material business and we have no idea what the hell we're doing. So I started doing the clinical trials. So I was kind of the first one to start doing clinical trials on the microbiome and disease. And then from there, of course, the whole COVID and COVID space kind of got us to the microbiome, to see the microbiome. When COVID hit, my first interest was, typically the microbiome should be supporting. That's our immunity, right?
Sure.
90 to 99% of immunity, in my opinion, starts in the gut. And so we need to look at the microbiome during COVID. When our lab discovered COVID in the stools, that was the next step, was to see what is the microbiome doing in people that have COVID, that have severe COVID, versus people that are exposed to COVID, but never got COVID, right? And so that was a great awakening and a great opportunity to see the power of bifidobacteria. Bifidobacteria, this bacteria that we are, babies are born with, and then we lose when we die. So when we saw that loss of bifidobacteria occurred in severe patients with COVID, that was a beginning. And then from there, we started looking at loss of bifidobacteria, discovered it was present in, diabetic children, it was present in autistic children, it was present in Alzheimer's, in Lyme disease, Crohn's disease. And so that was the beginning of seeing, okay, well, we know this important microbe, then what is killing it and what is increasing it, right? So that's kind of a basic. It's almost like discovering the hemoglobin is an important marker for blood loss or people that are losing blood. And then realizing that the hemoglobin being below 7 requires a blood transfusion. So we're at the beginning of the science on microbes and the microbiome. But I think the public needs to know, what to trust, who to trust, where to look at the data, how to criticize the data. Because truthfully, 80% of the data that's out there is flawed, because the laboratories are not validated. The techniques were not validated. They didn't have clinical data. So everything, and also mice studies and rat studies do not reproduce the human microbiome. So the public really needs to know all that. So that's why the Malibu Microbiome meeting was created.
It sounds amazing. For the people that are listening, when they hear microbiome, when they hear all these like microbes in this, it seems confusing. Can you get into really like how it works? And I think you gave me a great explanation the first time we ever spoke about how the gut biome works and more importantly, its function within our health and our body.
Yeah, so the microbiome is essentially, microbes all over us, in our skins, in our eyes. There's a microbiome of every organ in the human body, and there's microbes all around us, right? And in the planet mostly. I mean, the motherboard of the microbiome, or the house of the microbiome, is really the planet and the soil. So I think you have to understand that we just don't coexist alone. Our microbes are interacting with microbes of the air, microbes of the dirt, microbes of other people. So what I study is really the microbiome of the gut, which is looking at the differences between, good microbes and bad microbes. And is there such a thing as a good microbe or a bad microbe? Remember, immunity is in the gut. So when we talk about immunity, and we have to start paying attention to the microbes. We have to start paying attention to the relative abundance of those microbes. Like, do we have a lot of bifidobacteria? Do we have a lot of Bacteroides? Is there what's called a leaky gut? In other words, differences and imbalance in the microbiome that allows viruses to penetrate through the colonic mucosa into the nerve, travel the nerve up and down, travel the blood vessels, travel the lymphatics. So really, it starts in the gut. Your gut is your wall. It's your barrier. And if you don't have a strong group of microbes that are stopping viruses, we're exposed to viruses. A tomato has viruses. A pepper has viruses. So you're eating those viruses enter your gut, and essentially you count on strong bacteria to get rid of those viruses. That's what we saw with COVID, right? COVID is much smaller than a bacteria. It's much smaller than bifidobacteria. Bifidobacteria is like 20 times at least bigger than COVID. So what happens when you have COVID? The virus comes into the lungs, but the lungs have blood vessels that travel to the gut. So those viruses penetrate the lungs, the nose, but even the nose has blood vessels, and that virus travels to the gut. So eventually the war becomes at the gut level, where microbes, bacteria pick up those viruses and get rid of them and put them back into the septic tank. So that's essentially how I look at it and how I see immunity happening.
So how many species of gut bacteria are there?
Trillions. And there's only about 10,000 that we've named. Every day I'm facing a new microbe that I had no idea what it was or what it is. And I tell my patients this, right? And I go, honestly, let's Google it, right? And let's go into PubMed. Let's see what's written on it, right? And there's usually nothing on it because it's a new discovery. It's a new microbe. It's a new genetic sequence that was just named. That's my favorite thing that we're starting to tap into now, is naming microbes, to basically see genetic sequences that people have in common in the disease pool and basically starting to name them. That's going to be a fun thing. But out of those 10,000 that we have named, we barely know about 100. Think about, we know Klebsiella pneumonia is a bad bug because we've seen it causing pneumonia, right? We know E. coli is a bad bug, but it can also be a good bug. We know Haemophilus influenza is a bad bug, but it can also be a good bug. So there's so many, C. diff, Clostridium difficile, Staph aureus. So there's so many microbes that we learned about in medical school that now we're looking at it. We're looking at them and we're saying, wow, I thought that was a bad guy. Why is it in the gut of that healthy individual? Maybe it's not a bad guy. Maybe it's doing something for that healthy individual, right?
We interrupt this episode with a shameless self-promotion. Do you have limited access to equipment and restricted time to train? Let me introduce you to Lean Enable, our Bare Essentials training program for those lean on time and equipment. Don't let limitations hold you back. Get able-bodied with our adaptive training to tackle the daily demands of life. Head to powerathletehq.com/lean and able and claim your 7-day free trial today. Now back to the show. Wow. The story you told me when you were in Africa, and I guess you were collecting samples and an elephant took like a big dump and you went over there and everybody was digging through it and it was covered in ticks. And you thought like, oh man, we're going to see Lyme disease in all these guys, and nobody had Lyme disease. And you were
no, nobody had it. So what I did is I collected the stools of the guide and I collected the stools of the elephant. And by the way, that guide took the dung, broke it in pieces, and then made me my food, and he didn't wash his hands. Okay. So I sat there and you could see the ticks are flying. And I was all for that because I'm like, you know what? I want to refloralize my gut. Yeah. I want to bring back the flora that I'm missing because I'm from I was born in North Africa. So having moved from North Africa to America, I probably have lost a lot of microbes that I was, that were part of my microbiome essentially. So anyway, so I said, so do you guys don't worry about Lyme disease here or ticks or bites? He's like, no, it's not a problem here in Africa. So I go, well, can I test your stools? And then I tested the stools of the elephant as well. The elephant had a phylum called spirochetes, which is where the Lyme is from. And the guide had the same phylum. So in essence, they recognize each other, right? I give the example also. So therefore, he's not going to develop an allergic reaction against a tick because he's not sterile. He's part of the environment. He's living in the environment. Now you look at a person that's in Mexico, right? That, when we go to Mexico, if we drink the water, we can get Giardia. But then you look at the Mexicans over there and they're drinking the water and they don't have Giardia because they have it. It's part of their microbiome. I think the more we sterilize our guts, the more we kill microbes, the less likely they are to recognize other microbes, and therefore you develop an allergic reaction. But think about it as you've got the bug in your gut. So now you're eating a hamburger with the bug. Your microbes are like, hey, it's part of the family. Bring it on. We're not going to develop an allergic reaction. But now if you have too much surplus of that bug, you're going to have vomiting and diarrhea because it's saying your body is going, wait a minute, it's too much. Unfriendly guys, even though we have it, let's get rid of the surplus, right? So our bodies are designed, when people have vomiting, diarrhea after an infection, our bodies are designed to release the bugs, to get rid of the bugs. So that's why you never really want to give Imodium or block the colon when a person has an infectious diarrhea. You want them to flush it out. But eventually what happens is they flush out all those microbes, and then they're left with no microbes, and then the gut becomes, hypermobile. It spasms. It continues to have the diarrhea because you've lost the good guys because they flushed out all the bad guys.
Yeah, my last year in my thing was my 9th year in the NFL. We were at training camp, and all they had was this ham, and I'm not a big ham fan, and I ate the ham anyway. I got sick and got diarrhea, and actually had diarrhea for almost 6 months. Where like every time I went to the bath or went to eat, it was like to the point where I was like drinking colostrum, like I was doing anything I could, and every single day I just got more and more tired. And I think the reason they never renewed my contract was they're like, oh, this guy's getting old. I'm like, I just think I was really tired. Because then once the season ended, I went and I just did a whole bunch of different strategies and it was fine. I felt great, but like that constant diarrhea sapped like the entire life out of me. Like I was so tired from it all the time. Because if you think like the immune system energy and it's constantly coming back, it was an awful thing. So whenever I feel or I hear from people that have that, I'm like, dude, I had that. That was a terrible thing to have to do. And is it a imbalance of gut bacteria? I mean, what does that look like? This episode of Power Athlete Radio is powered by Train Heroic, the most immersive strength training app experience on the market. We've built an online training business by partnering with Train Heroic to deliver all of our world-class training programs like Jack Street, Hammer, Field Strong, and Grindstone. To learn which Power Athlete training program best suits your goals, head to powerathletehq.com/training. And if you're a coach looking to build a business with the best training tech in the business, head to trainheroic.com/powerathletehq. And now back to the show.
Yeah, I think you probably started off with an infection. Maybe the pork was not cooked properly, or maybe there's some, first of all, pork has a ton of parasites and, it sleeps in its poop, it bathes in mud. I mean, it's not the cleanest animal. I don't recommend pork just for that reason, especially for people that have a sensitive gut or have lost a lot of microbes, right? Yeah. So we tend to think of disease as the culprit is always a microbe, right? We think like, well, pneumonia, it's strep pneumonia, therefore, we got to kill the streptococcus. What we don't look at is the other side. What are we doing when we're killing that streptococcus? Are we killing the rest of the microbes as well? And we're not focusing on the lost microbes, because what happens is action leads to a reaction. You kill one bug, and then next thing you know, you kill other bugs, and then other bugs get killed and don't get sustained, and then viruses penetrate, and now you have a complete imbalance of the gut. And now you wake up one morning with a disease or chronic fatigue syndrome, and you go, what happened to me? It starts off with, one infection that basically entered, killing that infection, and then not replenishing the good microbes, right? So I think probably in you probably had an infection from the pork, and then essentially from there, you removed all the good microbes that you had, and then it's re-getting those good microbes again to get back into balance to stop the diarrhea. But at the same time, there's a spasm that occurs in the colon that doesn't stop the diarrhea. So the need to slow down the colon is important. The need to maybe avoid dairy, because maybe you've lost that bacteria that absorbs calcium, with the first shot of diarrhea. So, usually with my diarrhea patients, I tell them, to kind of, I give them some Imodium to just slow down the colon, but also I tell them to avoid dairy for at least 6 months until they kind of rebuild their microbes, because that's probably what happened to you, is you were trying to get back fast into rebuilding your gut, but at the same time you weren't ready. Yeah. So you need to kind of calm down the gut and then rebuild with the good bacteria.
I didn't eat pork for years, and then we started kind of eating it a little bit, like ribs and different things. And now that we started working with you with Cash, now we don't eat any pork anymore. So he asks, like, every day, I'm like, hey, what do you want for dinner? He's like, can we have ribs? I'm like, no ribs. So he's
I'm so tough.
No, well, it's he's type 1 diabetic, so it's really hard to. Yes. Like last night, he was still hungry after he ate. So, I cut him up a bunch of chicken and trying to feed him. But it's the dynamic nature of type 1 diabetes is an ever changing landscape. So it's good that, he's actually getting fiber, and we're working to, recreate his BIF. I'm fascinated by the microbiome as it relates around the world in different countries. And when we were on the call the other day, you were talking about that there was a bacteria that you had from being from Morocco that for some reason I have, that you were like a white person from California shouldn't have this bacteria. How do you make sense of that type of stuff when you see things kind of regionally that everybody looks like this, and then all of a sudden you see outliers and random things? How do you take that into account?
I think because we're at the beginning, I don't really, look at it too much. I kind of just say, you know what, it's at the back of my brain, and I know I'm going to get back to it at some point. But it's just an interesting observation, right? So, we've analyzed stools from, China, from Japan, from Italy. So we get to see, a little bit at the surface of what the microbiome looks like in countries, right? And the differences. We've analyzed stools from the Amazon jungle. We've analyzed stools from centenaries that are in Greece. So we have you've heard me speak about, going to South Africa and collecting stools from guides and drivers and everything. So that's what I do, right? And then also we have the microbiome of chimpanzees and zebras and cows, cows in Malaysia, cows in Virginia. So we kind of, have this very superficial look at the microbiome right now. What we're trying to figure out is, what does it look like, right? We're trying to map the microbiome of the planet in the animals in Malaysia, the animals in Virginia, in Texas. We're trying to look at humans, different races. And here's why. Because when you look at a Chinese from China who basically lives in Nanjing and basically is in a factory with multiple workers, and you look at their microbiome, and then you look at a Chinese person that works in a factory in America or works in a restaurant in America, it's a different microbiome. I mean, they have kind of like the same similarities, but there's differences there, right? Same thing when you look at Americans versus Italian, an Italian from Italy versus an Italian in America. Differences. When you look at me from Morocco in America versus a Moroccan in Morocco, it's similarities, but there are still differences. There are lost microbes that occur. And it's interesting because America has lost a lot of microbes. And I think we overdo things. We over sterilize. We over clean our products. Think about our milk. Remember when we were kids, you used to have milk in the front door and it would last 3 days because it was fresh milk.
Yeah.
Now, in an effort to keep this milk lasting in the grocery store because it doesn't sell, they put preservatives in there, right? And then they put it in the grocery store. It could stay 3 weeks there, but the expiration is like almost a month.
Yeah.
When have you ever seen milk lasting a month, right?
Yeah.
So
no, we had a milkman when I was a kid. We had a milkman that came twice a week, and he would
Me too.
There was like a little thing that he would leave outside, there was a tin box kind of looking thing, and they put milk in there, and we'd have to like rush in and put it in. But it was like milk only lasted 3 days, so if you didn't drink it, you had to pour it out by Sunday.
Yeah, and by the way, we need to get back to that, because is chronic disease increasing in this country because we're not drinking fresh milk? We need to get back to that. So whoever is a business tycoon over there, let's start bringing milk back. I'm sure a lot of people would love fresh milk. So
what about
think about what those preservatives are doing.
What about the argument that we're the only mammal that drinks milk past weaning, and you get into a lot of these groups that are like, dairy is poison and they shouldn't drink it, and only it's the cause and root cause of all these diseases. I mean, I've heard that argument out of the kind of like the paleo vegan crowd, and it's pretty fascinating that like it's so polarizing. People are either like, drinking milk past weaning is the death of you, or this is like the secret to life.
Yeah, I don't know. The problem is science has been made. I mean, science is controversial, right? If it's not controversial, it's not science, period, right? I mean, we should be questioning everything. Do we know for sure? I don't think we know for sure, but I think there needs to be a lot more data on that. And, unfortunately, the data and the research, because they make it so controversial, nobody really wants to invest in that research, right? Mm-hmm. Think about, the company that's selling the preservatives for the milk. Do they really want to go back to fresh milk? They're making a ton of money selling preservatives, right? So I think there's a movement in this country where science is interfered with by the politics, but also by the media to sell another product. So it becomes a battle of, what is the real story? Is it true? I don't know. We don't know until you see more research. I'll tell you, there's a lot of things that I believed when I was a scientist to be true. I was one of those people as well that basically thought that, hey, we shouldn't be drinking milk after a certain age. Now I've kind of come back to it and realized maybe we shouldn't drink it if we lack certain microbes. And maybe people after a certain age cannot drink milk because they lack the microbes. The process of aging is losing the good microbes. We age by losing good microbes. Think about bifidobacteria. Bifidobacteria is present in newborns, absent in old people that are dying. So that bacteria, decreases with age. I would want to think that we would want to try to keep it alive longer, able to stand, to grow longer.
Yeah, so years ago, it was probably about maybe 7 or 8, no, almost 10 years ago, Tom Incledon from Cosenta had us do a bunch of genetic testing through this group called Amsterdam New Genomics. And we gave our blood, they did all the genetic testing, and I'm in this, it's like an annuity almost, in that I get research every week on when something that hits within my kind of genetic code, I get research. I got my dad done, I got my son, I got Kate, and I got myself done. So I get a ton of research, and one of the genetic things that I have is something for amylase deficiency, which, and I have this 100%, like round circle, where any form of physical exercise should result in such chronic pain that I can't get out of bed, and any extended exercise will reduce rhabdomyolysis. So wow. I get this, and then I called the researcher, because I'm like, dude, I played in the NFL for 10 years, competed in the CrossFit Games, I trained, like I don't have any of this. The guy got real quiet. And I was like, what do you think? And he's like, this is just one more day that we don't know what the fuck we're talking about with this genetic code. And he's like, there's something higher order. But then he hit me with something where he goes, the genes can express in an infinite amount of ways based on what we've seen with the gut bacteria. So each piece of gut, and there's more bacteria in the body than there are cells, and each one of those gut bacteria influence the genes in different ways. So it could be fact that like something in your gut is protecting you, or there's something higher order that we don't know that's basically made this null and void, because based on what you're telling me, this should be an effect, but you've bypassed it some way.
100%. And by the way, that's what science is, right? I always joke, and my book, Let's Talk Shit.
I have a signed copy. So
yeah. So when you see that, I wrote it to basically say, look, I could be full of it or I could know my shit. But ultimately it's science. We don't know. We don't know the microbiome. And here's the biggest question. Is it that you inherited microbes from your dad, and therefore you guys have the same genetic makeup in a way? Are we inheriting microbes from our parents that determine our personalities, that determine who we are, that determine our ability to do sports or not, right? So I think that's all, that's the fascination. When you look at different individuals, they have different microbes. But then when you look in a family, they share similar microbes, and to the point that the husband and wife actually share the same microbes. My husband and I have been married 30 years. We share the same microbes, but even our personalities have changed. I've become a lot more laid back. He used to be the laid back guy, and I used to be the hurricane. And now he's the hurricane and I'm the laid back person. And then we switch back and forth. So we've kind of like found this balance between us where and we know what we're thinking, like before we even think about it, right? So is that microbes at work that have been so close together and symbiotic, which, then you start asking the question, like, is there a compatibility between people that makes them attracted to each other, right? Is it microbial? Is it animalistic to a certain level, right? So
sounds like a dating app. This sounds like a dating app. You give your shit.
Probably a dating app in the future.
Yeah, you give your poop, and then you get a profile, and then you match with people. Well, I mean,
listen, I personally think that it's going to be in the future. We're going to pick our presidents based on their microbiome. Okay.
What you're talking about is fascinating with the bifidobacteria. That we have it as children, and then as we age. A few months ago, Adil Khan, who's been on this podcast from Materna, had an event here in Austin. Doc Yu was there, and Doc Incledon and everybody, and he got up and he talked about, we have the technology to have people live to 120 years old. With all the genetic modifications and all the biologics and everything we're doing, the one thing that they can't wrap their head around is avoiding all-cause mortality. The idea that like all of a sudden you're healthy and then you get cancer, or you get sick and you die. So like if we can really wipe out that all-cause mortality, like our genetic code should last to about 120 is what they said. the issue comes down to, when we're looking at like Bifida bacteria and all these bacteria, your ability to maintain this over time. And maybe I'm making a reach too far, it's a bridge too far. Sounds like our ability to protect and have a dynamic, robust gut biome is what's going to allow us to kind of beat that all-cause mortality. Because, like as we were saying, I was around, probably exposed to COVID hundreds of times. I mean, I sat in this very podcast room with a guy with COVID who coughed on me for 3 days, never once had a symptom, never tested positive, never had antibodies, and have avoided it at all costs. So I'm wondering if like that dynamic nature of diversity and whatever will protect us, and your ability to kind of like safeguard that is what's going to allow us to live longer, healthier life.
100%. Well, in my opinion, yes. I think diversity is the key to health. Good diversity, because obviously you have diversity with bad microbes. That's not a good thing. But good diversity is, in my opinion, what allows us to survive. We've showed it. We showed it in our data when we looked at COVID, severe COVID patients. Severe COVID patients were lacking 2 microbes and had a lot of bacteroides and had very low diversity. Now, the criticisms, and people were saying, not criticism, but basically comments from scientists and doctors were well, these people were sick, so obviously they're going to lose diversity. If they're sick, they don't want to eat. But these were stool samples we took on day 1 of the presentation of the symptoms. At the beginning, you're not really that sick that you're not eating. So technically, those people were eating. So I really believe that it's the diversity problem that basically gave them the ability or the susceptibility to catch COVID to begin with.
Is it? Go on.
No, so loss of diversity, it was definitely one of the markers at making you susceptible, and also allowing you to survive. Like in your case, you had great diversity. My farmer, I did a video at the beginning of the pandemic where the farmer had his wife had COVID. She was a teacher. She was indoors. He was outdoors. He was exposed to cow poop and breast milk and everything. And so he wanted to catch COVID to just get it out of the way. He took her saliva, smeared it on his face, kissed her, ate with her, basically they did everything. He never got COVID. One of the key features in his microbiome was his diversity. And I really think that's probably what protected him.
Is the diversity question sounds dynamic in nature, in that it's not only the people you're around, it's the microbes in the soil, so the environment, and then also the food you're consuming, and probably a million other factors that we're not establishing. So you're looking at like who you're around, the environment, like within the soil, like if they're stripping out nutrients out of the soil with glyphosate at all times. And then you're around people that are maybe not the healthiest individuals on the planet, and you're eating a food that's highly processed and has been stripped of anything that looks like, bacteria. What chance do people have?
I think, everything is a little bit, immunity. When you go to an immunologist and you have allergies, what do? They give you like little bits of that, like you're allergic to peanuts, right? So they give you a little bit at a time to kind of get you used back to the product that you're allergic to, right? I think it's the same thing in the microbiome. I think the more you are exposed to microbes, little by little, obviously not a huge thing, but in your case, you were probably exposed to this guy that you interviewed, and then you've been going out and you didn't really stop during the pandemic. So little by little, you got exposed to a lot of different strains of the virus, and you became essentially immune, right? That's your immunity. By the way, just out of curiosity, did you ever test yourself to see if you have antibodies?
Yes.
And?
Zero. None.
Zero. Yeah, that's incredible. Yeah, no, I know. That's the same thing. I have a lot of people who've been exposed to a lot of COVID, don't wear masks, and are out there and essentially still don't have antibodies or even T-cell detect. Yeah. So, those are the resilient microbiomes. Those are the people that we want to learn from. We want to know what's going on there. And that's where the research gets really exciting.
Yeah, no, I went and I got blood tested, and I wanted to know, like, not only that I came up negative, and then they tested me, it didn't have the antibodies either. The one issue I ran into with masks is I weld and fab in the shop, and I wear an N95 mask when I weld, and I still get metal shards and metal dust in my mouth and my nose. So when everybody started preaching about the masks, I'm like, I'm pretty sure COVID is much smaller than the holes I can see with my own eyes. And the fact that I weld and I get still a mouthful of metal from wearing a N95 mask, it felt like a fool's errand. So I can, and then people are thinking these magical masks are going to protect them. And I'm like, I know contrary, just based off of like some practical observations in the shop. So when to see people getting all high and mighty on the masks, I was kind of like, oh my God, this is like, I felt like I was living in like a bizarro world.
Yeah. Well, here's the other thing. I mean, and this is why the mask didn't really make sense on me. Let's say somebody's coughing on me. They're going to cough on my hair, right? I'm going to remove the mask. The virus is still around me. They're going to cough on my skin. The skin absorbs, the virus gets into the skin at some point, into the eyes. The eyes have a lot of blood vessels. So unless you're covering yourself, completely like we're in the Jetsons, the mask really, and that's the fear that I have, is that we start believing that the environment is toxic and we start wearing, outfits like the Jetsons, because now we can't breathe the bacteria, because now we're allergic to everything, because we've created ourselves to be so sterile to begin with. I don't think the answer is in the sterility. I think the answer is in the diversity, in the touching the soil, in the embracing people, being connected with people. I was on a flight and by the way, like you at the beginning, I didn't really believe in the whole mask, because I said, well, I'm going to work on my gut. I'm not going to work on my mask. I'm going to work on making sure, because I can catch the virus through my eyes, etc. And I am going to take off that mask at some point. And when I take it off, because I'm not going to pay attention and I'm not going to have gloves, there's going to be some COVID on the mask that are going in my hands. And I'm not going to think about going to wash my hands every 5 minutes. So, that whole sterility is just too much. At some point, you got to like build up your immunity. And that means exposing yourself. That means not being scared of a virus, right? Especially if you're a healthy guy like you, where you're exercising, you're doing everything right, you've been healthy the whole pandemic, and that was the same thing for me. Was, I tested the waters, right? At the beginning, we were scared, right? I was dressed like an astronaut in space when I saw my first patients. And then I realized I can't breathe in that stuff. And I was literally, I had the big helmet, the whole hazmat suit and everything. I couldn't breathe. I'm like, you know what? If I'm going to just die, then let it be. I'm just going to expose myself to microbes. Yeah. And just so I tested myself. And I always remember the first patient I was exposed to, and I didn't have a mask. And she called me and she's like, by the way, doctor, I found out I have COVID. And I said, okay, I guess I'm going to have COVID now. And I kept waiting and it didn't happen. And then, the next patient, and then I flew to Zimbabwe, as I'm analyzing the microbiome. And next thing you know, I'm not wearing a mask on the plane. And I'm thinking, oh my God, I'm going to be getting, COVID on this plane. And everybody was freaking out and nothing, So I think, you get over the fear once you take courage to confront the virus and realize that you can trust your immunity, right? So we've survived this long with all these viruses. Now, of course, there are people that are immunosuppressed.
Yes.
At that point, those are different. Yes, wear the mask, wear that. But in a healthy individual who is doing everything right and survived COVID, I mean, and that's the problem, right? The problem is, and the divide, and they knew that to get to us, to divide. The problem is there are those, we are not equal in our microbiome, right? Mm-hmm. Some people have a lot of bifidobacteria, a lot of diversity, and some people don't. We're born equal. We're born with a lot of bifidobacteria, but then we do some things, drugs, alcohol, whatever we do, because we choose to do those things. we demolish microbes. And then when you demolish microbes, you're immunosuppressed. Then, of course, viruses are coming in. So now those people who are immunosuppressed, who do not have access to the top of the line, research, etc. I get the reason they believed in the mask, and I get the reason why they believed in the vaccines,
Sure.
because they got themselves there. But we have to look at the other side always and say, we need to learn from people like you who never got COVID, who never was jabbed, who doesn't have antibodies. We need to understand what it is in you that makes you different so that others that are immunosuppressed can be like you. That's the key.
So you keep bringing up bifidobacteria. Can you kind of describe and help us kind of understand, because it feels that all the talks always go back to how much BIF you have.
Yes.
Are we born with a certain amount? I mean, can we add it later in life? And then what factors end up decreasing it over time so that we can probably make a more educated decision about our lives?
I think this is all new. This is...
well, you're a researcher, so I mean, this isn't it. So that's why I wanted to have you on, because nobody this doesn't exist.
Yes. So loss of bifidobacteria is something we must take seriously. When you look at newborns, their bifidobacteria is very high, and they're mostly bifidobacteria. And like I said, as we die, as we get cancer, loss of bifidobacteria. So remember, bifidobacteria we discovered, and we published on it. We discovered it in autism. We discovered it in Lyme disease. We discovered it. And by the way, autism, I'm not the one that discovered. Dr. Adams and his team actually did a whole study on autism where they showed loss of bifidobacteria in autism. We just validated his work. Remember, research needs to be valid, verified, and reproducible. So the fact that I saw the same thing in my kids with autism, in some kids with autism, that they were lacking bifidobacteria, is a huge, eye opener, because now I'm validating another doctor who basically said, hey, we noticed loss of bifidobacteria. So loss of bifidobacteria, we noticed in Lyme, we noticed in Crohn's, and we noticed in invasive cancer. So that became my focus, right? And then what happened was I was starting to look at vaccinated versus unvaccinated. And if you remember our study of the vaccines, I started testing a lot of doctors before and after they went back to work. And we noticed that their bifidobacteria before and after was dropped by half when they went after the vaccine. And then we followed a lot of these doctors, and the bifidobacteria kept dropping, which made me ask the question, is the spike protein from the vaccine creating a bifidophage, right? And so that was the beginning of looking at the bifidobacteria. And then when you start looking at vaccine injured, you realize they have zero bifidobacteria. When you start looking at long haulers, zero bifidobacteria. So what's happening to the bifidobacteria? Does it come back? How do we bring it back? How does it stick? How does it implant? Does a probiotic work? What probiotic works? Those are all questions that, we're in the research world to try to answer. And that's why it's important to do the research. And that's why it's important to do the Malibu Microbiome meeting, to discuss this with other peers, to have that discourse in a way. Science is about arguing, your hypothesis. Scientists come to the table with a different hypothesis, right? What I didn't like about the pandemic was the fact that those who had a different hypothesis than the vaccine were censored, and that should have never happened. We should have been able to discuss, like we are discussing, you and I today, how come, which you bring up an excellent point, how come you had a guy that coughed on you, you never got COVID, you've not had COVID the whole pandemic, you've not worn a mask, and you don't have antibodies? I mean, that's like, the gold is in your case, in my opinion. And, you remember me salivating when I had your case, because I was like, I need to see what's going on there. And I there's on X, there's a lot of people that basically tag me every time someone says, well, I've not worn a mask and I've not been vaccinated, I've yet to catch COVID. So everybody sends people to me to test those people because, yeah, that's the goal.
Yeah. Well, so what are the things? I mean, like what is killing the bifidobacteria? I mean, we're obviously born with a ton of it, and it feels like very similar, like let's say like telomeres, right? Where all of a sudden you look at the telomeres and they can kind of gauge your age, and then all of a sudden when the last telomere expires, that's usually the end of you. So it feels like if you have no bifidobacteria, and people that are passed away or on their final days have no bifidobacteria, like how does somebody add this? And more importantly, like they, obviously they go to you, they get tested. Are there strategies to rebuild the bifidobacteria? How do we protect it?
So it's a complex science, okay? Because even though, and remember you asked that question with the amylase, right?
Yeah.
It's the same thing in the microbiome space. You have people that have zero bifidobacteria and are very healthy, okay? And you look at their microbiome, and what happens is there's another microbe that compensates that loss of bifidobacteria. It's almost like a new good microbe comes on as you get older to offset the loss of the bifidobacteria. And that microbe is what carries you on for the next 20, 30 years until you lose that microbe and then you start decompensating, right? The people that had problems during COVID lost 2 microbes and had an overgrowth of a certain microbe that's not necessarily a good microbe that we actually picked up was linked with anxiety. So remember during COVID, a lot of people were very anxious when they had COVID.
Yeah.
So we started testing. We did what's called a GAD questionnaire, which is basically an anxiety questionnaire. Every stool sample we tested, we added to that a GAD questionnaire to see what is the anxiety level in those people that were testing the microbiome, not knowing anything about their history, just knowing their poop and the data we get from the poop and the GAD questionnaire. And what we discovered is actually the same microbe that was elevated during COVID was elevated in these people that were anxious, the severely anxious. And we also discovered loss of bifidobacteria in the anxious patients, right? So as a person anxious because they've lost a good bacteria, the bifidobacteria, is a person at risk for cancer because we've lost a lot of bifidobacteria. That data is coming, right? I mean, this is all new. This is, again, like discovering hemoglobin. And now you have a marker for hemoglobin, and you test the hemoglobin, and it's the same hemoglobin in every different lab or reproduced by different technicians. They take the same blood test. 2 different technicians, are showing it's the same hemoglobin. Now you have a valid test on hemoglobin, and you could say, okay, well, it's time to transfuse. Now, it took years before we got to realize, hey, we're transfusing all these patients and they're getting hepatitis C. Maybe we should look out for hepatitis C. Now we have to develop a test to look for hepatitis C or HIV, etc. So science is slow progressing, unfortunately. But here's the problem. If we stop science, then we'll never progress, right? If we stop this notion that, if we stop the notion that bifidobacteria could be a beginning of disease, then we're not going to advance, right? So, because unfortunately, there's so many businessmen that figuring out what kills the bifidobacteria hurts them, right? Because imagine if I discover that product X, destroys the bifidobacteria, that hurts the company who's making product X. But if that company knows that their product is killing the bifidobacteria, they should start reinventing themselves and open a different company, is my opinion. So again, fresh milk might be a good idea for them.
Yeah, no, I mean, it makes complete sense. Would you say that there's kind of equal parts for the gut bacteria? For example, like the people were around, the environment with the soil or the food? Is one higher on order? Like because there's a ton of argument, and if you click onto any form of social media, religion has been replaced by diet and nutrition. It's like, it's the new God. It's the new religion. Like I hear like people sit in these camps like they're, a Christian, a Muslim, a Buddhist. I mean, it's crazy. You have these carnivore individuals that, vegetables are going to kill you. And then you have the, vegan vegetarians on the other side, where the, secret to life is vegetables and milk and animal products are going to kill you. And then you have, paleo people only eat 40,000 a year. I mean, it's these camps, and it's like knives are out. People are making money. They stab this. I mean, I've always taken the approach that the healthiest people on the planet can eat the most diverse diet. If I can't eat something, I can't process it, that's more of an indicator of me. And I've said for a long time, if the only food that you can digest is red meat, that is indicative of how metabolically broken you are. And there's people that are metabolically broken. I mean, good example, my longtime friend, Rob Wolf, has had a jacked up gut for a number of years, has talked about it, written books about it. And, we go back and forth, and he's like, something that looks like a carnivore diet is a diet that is most beneficial to me because I don't get sick. And he's like, but I just know that it's not helping in terms of gut diversity, but, where do you balance that? So when I look at these diets, is there ever a space where you could test somebody's gut biome and give them some actionable information on what might be their best approach? Or is it always going to be diversity?
We're not there yet. I mean, that's the most honest answer, right? That's why even my lab, my genetic sequencing lab, could have been a commercial lab like all those other tests out there. But it's not, because it's real science. It's science needs to be questioned, needs to be understood, needs to be validated. So we're not there where we can say, you should be eating this. I have some ideas based on what I'm seeing, with my testing, and I guide patients. But if you'll notice, even with you and the kid, I always say it's research. We're at the beginning. I could be wrong in 5 years. Somebody could prove me wrong, right? I mean, so far it seems like it's working because I'm seeing the clinical picture improving, and I'm seeing the gut improving. So when you see validation in the clinical and you attain a cure, and you see the microbiome changing, look at the case of the kid with autism, right? Who started saying mama and baba after a fecal transplant using his sister's microbiome. The key feature in this kid was loss of diversity, but also he had an overgrowth of a certain microbe that his sister didn't have. So when we gave him his sister's microbes, all of a sudden he had toe fungus, they disappeared. All of a sudden he started saying words, sentences. And in the microbiome space, there was a process of engraftment. Engraftment means like you're matching the donor, right? The donor and the recipient are matching. So he was completely different than what he was in. And by the way, all those publications are on progenibiome.com.
Yeah.
If anybody wants to see those cases. This was an amazing case because it shows the power of engraftment, the power of a good fecal transplant done well, that not only achieves clinical improvement, but also achieves engraftment where he matches the donor. And hopefully with time and education and speech therapy and everything, he's going to catch up on the 19 years of development that he's lost. Because right now he's back to stage 1, being like a 1-year-old almost, with a lot of microbes that he doesn't really, has not grown into, right? So he's lost 19 years of development of the microbiome, but also development of speech and walking and critical thinking and, and language, etc. So, it's a challenge, but I think really the key to the science and the key to the testing right now is to practice the art of medicine and innovate to achieve improvement and cures. And then from there, going back and seeing what the microbiome looks like to validate the improvement. So in other words, like if I have a patient with anxiety and I notice that their microbiome is off, I'm going to work with them on their gut and optimize their gut to try to see if their anxiety is decreased. But anxiety is subjective, right? I mean, it's like, is it the brain triggering the anxiety? Is it the gut triggering the anxiety? But if I see my patient with anxiety is improving and his Bacteroides are dropping or his microbes are improving, then I know I'm on the right path, right? And that's really to me, that's the beauty of testing the microbiome. On X, people are sending me, like recently someone sent me this pumpkin cleanse for parasites, right? Well, and some people are swearing by it. And so I volunteered myself to test the stools of 2 people because these stools are expensive. So I don't have, a budget to test like 100 people for free. But I said, you know what? I'm curious. Let me test at least 2 people to see what am I seeing before and after this pumpkin drink, right? We'll see. If it shows something that's positive, then I'll do more samples. That's what happened to me with vitamin C to begin with. I saw on me vitamin C increased my bifidobacteria. So what happened is the next thing I did is I started giving vitamin C to all my patients. And then I tested their stools before and after and noticed indeed vitamin C increases bifidobacteria, right? But it's short term because we did the studies within 24 hours of testing. So that's validation in a lab, right? Where you could see not only one sample, but like 20 plus samples of patients who you give vitamin C and their bifidobacteria increases. And the p-value statistic to make it statistically significant is 0.0001, right? So you've got something there. Same thing with ivermectin. I pushed out a hypothesis on ivermectin saying, well, it increases the I think it increases the bifidobacteria because ivermectin is the product of a bacteria that is in the same phylum, the same group of microbes that share one thing in common. And therefore, it probably feeds maybe their brother and sister microbes, right? This microbe that secretes the ivermectin, right? And so what happened is I was the guinea pig number 1. I took it, tested myself before and after, and noticed, it does increase the bifidobacteria because they're in the same phylum. So then I started testing patients, patients we were treating for parasites with ivermectin. I'm a gastroenterologist, so I'm allowed to use ivermectin for parasites. And so, and other things, scabies. And that was the biggest joke with ivermectin when they trashed it. And they said it was a horse paste. I said, then why are we giving it to babies with scabies, right? If it's so dangerous that you should not give it to dying patients with COVID, why are we giving it to babies with scabies and lice, right? Because that's the indication of it. That's the clinical trials my sister did, to bring ivermectin to the market like 15, 16 years ago. Okay. So the problem is ivermectin is no longer in patent. So they can't make that much money on it. And therefore it's a cheap drug and there's no, they can't make money on a cheap drug. So, but here's the thing, ivermectin does increase. So I wrote a hypothesis saying maybe it does increase because it's in the actinobacteria phylum. And I did that, by the way, as a test. And I put my name only on that hypothesis. I didn't put any other authors. I took the hit because I wanted to see what was happening to that hypothesis. And sure enough, I was right. They retracted the hypothesis. So they fell in the rabbit hole that I planted. And I did it on purpose. And I saw what they did. And basically, they retracted a hypothesis. Now I'm coming back with the study where we showed the before and after ivermectin, and we're seeing that ivermectin increases the bifidobacteria. And we presented at the American College of Gastro, which, by the way, once you present as a poster, it cannot be retracted because it's a poster that's published. So it is a publication out there, even though it's an abstract. It's not the full publication, but it does increase the bifidobacteria, which is basically awakening doctors to say, oh, is that why it's working in cancer? Is that why it's working in this? Is that why my C. diff patient, it worked when I thought he had a parasite, but instead he had C. diff and he no longer has C. diff? So a lot of people are starting to use it for other cases, for bacteria, not just parasites. It was indicated initially for a parasite, but ultimately it can be used for other things because I think one of the main mechanisms of it is by increasing bifidobacteria in your gut to allow you to get rid of those parasites that have come in.
Wow. Just to kind of not belabor the point, but when we talk about diet, is there a distinct difference in the gut diversity from people, let's say, that eat more what I would call a westernized packaged? I mean, I watched a a video yesterday of this lady who does all of her shopping at Walmart and is able to feed a family of 5 on like $150 a week and all this packaged food. It was like Doritos and this. I was ill because, we feed our kids. I mean, I buy a cow from a local farmer. Everything one ingredient, we go out of our way. I mean, people take fancy vacations and buy fancy clothes. We spend way too much money on food, but I would much rather spend money on food and have healthier kids and healthier family than some of the other things. But I wonder, when people come in and you do the testing on them, is there any questionnaire or discussion about hey, how do you eat? What does your diet look like? Or is it just kind of can you tell based on looking at their gut bacteria, I can tell you how this person eats?
Can I tell? I can tell usually from looking at the patients how they eat. So that's one way. But I can also tell the bacteria doesn't really tell you. Here's one important thing that people don't realize is adaptation. Our microbiome and our microbes adapt to whatever you give them. So if you're eating the way that you're eating, your family has adapted to your way of eating. When you look at a family that eats Doritos and eats crappy food and they have a good microbiome, you have to say to yourself, those people are resilient enough that the crappy food doesn't affect them. I have some donors, by the way, stool donors that I use for fecal transplant who have the worst diet, in my opinion, okay? But yet you look at their microbiome, you look at their bifidobacteria, you look at their Bacteroides, you look at the Firmicutes, you look at the proteobacteria, and they have a spectacular microbiome. So again, it's not that straightforward. I think humans have an ability to adapt, and the person who eats crappy food has adapted to eating crappy food and still maintains a splendid microbiome. So I don't think the nutrition necessarily guides the health of the microbiome per se. I think we all have different ways of eating that we've adapted since childhood, right? So you're making your kids adapt to this kind of nutrition because you want them in the future. You want to give them the best opportunities to have a stronger gut. And to you, the better meat, the better milk, the better vegetables is the way for them to survive. But at the same time, you have to realize, look at the people that are the homeless people that are eating from garbage cans, right? And, very few of them had COVID during the pandemic.
Yeah.
What is it? But they have other things, right? Some of them have mental illness. Some of them have, skin disorders. They have other things, but immunity wise, some of them have been really strong during the pandemic. And I always say some because it's just not a all or nothing. It's not a one way or the other. It's really middle ground. The diet is very interesting to me. Why is it that, and unfortunately, there's so much influence in the world where you have these celebrities that are pushing these products and basically are influencing the world to push the product because they're getting paid to influence the world, right? And then you have these people that basically change their diet and they become carnivore and all of a sudden they're healthy. So now they're pushing and they're influencing their diet for others because they feel like, hey, but the carnivore diet did great for me. But that's great because you've adapted to the carnivore diet and that's what helped for you. Vice versa, the vegans who basically stopped eating meat and all of a sudden are feeling great, they've adapted to that vegan diet and probably they didn't have the microbes to absorb to digest the meat, right? And vice versa, people that cannot eat, vegetables or dairy maybe lost microbes that are not digesting the dairy or not digesting the greens, right? So this is a new frontier that we have to be really open-minded and we have to stay unbiased and we have to kind of say, okay, well, am I seeing something here? And then am I reproducing in other patients, right? When I gave ivermectin to my patients and I started seeing the bifidobacteria increase, obviously not everybody increased bifidobacteria. Some of them it didn't. The question then becomes, why did those people not increase their bifidobacteria? Is it because they're taking other stuff that are suppressing the bifidobacteria? Same with the vitamin C, right? If a person is taking vitamin C and it's not increasing their bifidobacteria, we have to ask the question, why? I think asking the questions, constantly asking the questions and answering one question after another is really how we're going to advance science. But if we stop asking questions and we just follow one narrative where it's, all or nothing, we'll never advance science. And when I hear doctors like Dr. Hotez, who basically, calls people that are questioning the vaccines anti-vaxxers or aggressors, well, yeah, I'm going to be aggressive if you're going to stop me from asking questions, because that's the whole basis of science. And if you want to go one-on-one with me, I'm happy to show the data that I've been researching with my money, not a grant, so that we can advance science, right? So when I stepped into COVID and I did the protocols on hydroxychloroquine, Z-Pak, vitamin C, D, and zinc, or ivermectin, doxycycline, zinc, or looked at COVID in the stools, or looked at loss of bifidobacteria in all these diseases, nobody paid me, right? Nobody paid my statistician to analyze the data. Nobody paid anybody to write the data. Nobody paid the journals to publish the data. Nobody paid the coordinators that were assembling the charts and gathering the data. That was expensive. Those were expensive studies. But why did I do it? I did it because I wanted to see the truth. I, like you, spend your money on good meat for your children. I spent my money on the research because that's the best way that I can protect my children. By knowing the truth myself, by researching myself. When I killed my bifidobacteria and I drank a kefir of unknown name, and I noticed my bifidobacteria wasn't increasing, I asked the question, why isn't my bifidobacteria increasing? I'm drinking a liter of this kefir, which I didn't really like to begin with. So then I tested the kefir. Well, the kefir didn't have bifidobacteria. So how am I going to increase my bifidobacteria if there's no bifidobacteria in the kefir? And it says on the label, bifidobacteria, right? So then my mind, because I'm telling all my patients, drink kefir. Well, obviously that's why their bifidobacteria is not increasing. So then my mind starts going, well, how many products are misleading the consumer, right? And one celebrity that I love, and I'm not going to say his name, came to my house and basically gave me a $27 kefir with bifidobacteria. He's like, oh, this drink you should be drinking this, Sabine. He wasn't trying to influence me. He doesn't have any money in this drink at all, but he thought somebody, clued him in on this $27 drink. So I'm like, well, before I'm going to drink it, first, let me see what's in it, right? And there was no bifidobacteria in that $27 drink. So out of 26 products that we tested in our local food stores in Ventura and Malibu that said bifidobacteria, only 3 of them had bifidobacteria. Now, I said that on Epoch Times when I was interviewed, and everybody, I got like tons of emails, like, please tell us what the 3 products are, right? Because they think, well, if they're going to eat those products, they're going to improve their bifidobacteria. No, it's not that simple. But here's the thing. I tested 26 products. Is it my job to influence a whole industry of products, of kefir, yogurt, etc.? No, I'm not there to destroy the kefir industry of the world. I'm there to tell the kefir industry, hey guys, I'm watching your products. Maybe you should put bifidobacteria if your label says bifidobacteria. Because if I'm noticing that, I am sure the agencies are going to, at some point, start picking it up and testing those products, right? Because that's what happens. Science gets written, and then agencies pick up on the science, and then they do due diligence, even though we think the FDA is against us. Not everybody at the FDA is against us. There's a lot of very good agents at the FDA who are doing the right thing. I've worked with them for the last, 3 decades, almost doing clinical research for pharma. They want to see the truth as well. So why do we do what we do to protect our kids? There is no value. There is no value to money when you have a kid that has a disease. You know that, I know that. Yeah. We will spend whatever it takes and whatever we can to save our kids, because that's who we are. And that's what God gave us as the ability. And when I see why I stepped into autism is exactly because of that, because I saw these moms going from one doctor to another, spending thousands. And, some of them are like housekeepers. They don't make that much money, but they will spend all their money, all their savings, all their time on their kids. And to me, those women are warriors. I call them my mama bears, and they're not going to quit until they fix their kids. I'm a mom. I get it. I know that's what it's all about. So you and I are the same.
Yeah. Well, so I was born in 76, and when I looked up the statistics, it was like 1 out of 10 million kids were born with autism. Now it's something like anywhere from like 1 to 8, 1 to 6. And I think when you and I talked 20 years from now, 2024, it'll be a 1-to-1. There won't be a child born in this country that doesn't have some version of autism. That to me feels like a fucking tidal wave of a crisis.
Yes.
So when I had the girls, I asked my mom actually, so like the vaccine schedule, I think we had 3. I think it was polio, measles, and maybe what's the one for if you get a cut?
Tetanus.
Yeah, tetanus were the 3 the 3 that we got, and we'd have to get a tetanus booster every year to play football, but that was all we got for vaccines. All of a sudden, fast forward when I had my girls, it was like 78 vaccines in California is what they needed to go to school. And I've listened to people talk about, the vaccines cause autism, but yet there's healthy. I mean, there's so much misinformation about autism, and more importantly, these childhood illnesses that are coming about. It feels like a landscape where it's not 1-to-1. Like if one child gets vaccinated, another one gets vaccinated, one loses bifidobacteria, one doesn't. I mean, it's so dynamic in nature, but unfortunately you can't sell a product, or you can't stand on a soapbox and point a finger if the question is, we're these malleable, dynamic creatures that everything is affected and different, and there's a million different factors that affect everything in a million different ways. Like for me with an amylase deficiency, how do we make sense of that? Like, how do we go forward and put some practices in place to help us make a more educated decision?
Well, I think the first thing is we need to start looking at the safety of these vaccines and multiple vaccines. Okay. The second thing is I think we need to start understanding that. And the one thing that really bothered me during the pandemic was vaccinating people that already had COVID. Why are you vaccinating someone that already has immunity against COVID? That's ridiculous, right? I remember in residency, I had in Morocco measles, mumps, and rubella. So I had the trifecta. I didn't really need to get vaccinated in residency for measles, mumps, and rubella, but it was mandated for me to do it. Otherwise, I couldn't start the residency. That's something that needs to change, in my opinion, because I actually developed a huge anaphylactic reaction after the MMR, and probably because my body already was exposed. I already had an immunity, or probably something that I was allergic to in the vaccine itself. I think, the concept of the vaccine is an intelligent one in the sense that, yes, you want to prevent a bacteria, you give a piece of the bacteria to kind of create that immunity. The problem is the manufacturing of the vaccine, the compounds that they add with that piece of the bacteria to sustain it, to make it live, or to keep it sustained, essentially, is where the problem lies. Because, and here's the other thing, what we discovered with the COVID vaccine is it kills the microbiome. We really need, and does it increase does the microbiome come back up after that vaccine, or does it keep on killing? I think in some people it keeps on killing. That's why we're seeing a lot of people that, 4 days after the vaccine, now they're wheelchair bound.
Yeah.
And we can't just stop and gaslight these people. We got to pay attention to what's happening, and we got to be honest and say, well, in that person, it affected them. Now, I have a doctor who had the vaccine. He dropped his bifidobacteria. He was taking tons of vitamins the whole pandemic, regardless. Well, that person, regardless of whether he got the vaccine, he brought back his bifidobacteria because he stopped getting vaccinated. But every time he was vaccinated, he would drop his bifidobacteria, right? So, there's got to be a point where you say, okay, you've gotten a vaccine, you've gotten one or two, let's stop. You don't need to receive multiple boosters, especially if it's the same compound, and especially if the virus is mutating. To me, the idea of vaccinating viruses is ridiculous because viruses are mutating. By the time you catch up to them, with the new vaccine du jour, you're basically onto a new strain. So you need to rethink the whole process. So even at the spike level, there are mutations, by the way. So so that's something that viruses should not, think about. If we had vaccines for viruses, we would have fixed HIV. There'd be a vaccine for HIV. There'd be a vaccine for herpes, for EBV. But all these years and all the work that's been done on viruses, there has not been one vaccine that has been successful against suppressing viruses. So you almost need to vaccinate the whole world at the same time exactly to make it work. But it does, since that's never going to happen because everybody's different and everybody has an opinion and everybody has a freedom to choose because we're not a bunch of sheep. Then you got to rethink the idea of vaccinating and really focus on early treatment than vaccination for viruses, in my opinion. That's what we did with HIV. HIV went from, hey, let's try to think of a vaccine to basically, hey, you know what? Let's start to think of treatment. And so we need to start treating these people early when they have COVID. Or other viruses and focusing on building the bifidobacteria rather than killing the bifidobacteria, continuing to kill the bifidobacteria, continuing to suppress people to make them dependent on more and more and more shots. And at some point, I think we're at the point now where the world is waking up. There's too many people that have too many kids with autism. I mean, everyone I talk to, I'm also of the same generation as you are. Yeah. And I don't remember anyone in my classroom with autism. No. I don't remember any family members with autism. I remember going to parties. Nobody talked about autism. Now the fact that celebrities, bankers, executives, pharma executives, politicians have kids with autism or pandas, that's a shock to me. That's a shock. That something is happening. And also the chronic diseases are going up. Crohn's disease is Crohn's disease is going up, Parkinson's is going up, Alzheimer's is going up. There's been the increase in Parkinson's alone from 2020 to now is through the roof compared to the steady increase of Parkinson's. It's gone from this to this. Something's happening. Same thing with ALS, same thing with Alzheimer's. So what are we doing? Are we killing the microbiome little by little? Are we diluting those microbes that mom gives to the baby? And therefore the baby is born with less microbes than mom has. And then the next baby is going to have less microbes. And are we killing bifidobacteria and important microbes that absorb, calcium, sugar? I think that's a crisis. That's why I wake up every day, because I'm thinking, well, once I'm dead, my kids have no chance. So my whole platform is Save the Biff. It's education. And back to the Malibu microbiome, my talk is Save the Biff. And I'm going to be talking about how to improve your bifidobacteria, how to avoid killing your bifidobacteria, little tricks here and there, and cases where I focused on the bifidobacteria that were improved. So, save in the last probably couple thousand samples that I've analyzed at Progenobiome, less than 5% have bifidobacteria in them, and less than 1% have lactococcus and lactobacillus. That's a problem. That's microbes that are disappearing. And here's the crazy thing. Bifidobacteria decomposes plastic. This whole concept of let's remove the plastics from the environment, let's stop the plastic industry. Maybe we should focus on building up the bifidobacteria. Maybe instead of killing it, we should build it up. Maybe we should have, drink stations, products, etc., that have bifidobacteria that are proven, that are quality products. Maybe we should give compounds that increase the bifidobacteria. And maybe we'll have peace at some point in the world, because maybe the people that are so edgy, so angry, are lacking bifidobacteria. I get attacked on X all the time by a bunch of trolls.
I saw it, and I am so I have a theory that Twitter rewards psychopaths. So antisocial psychopaths, people that you would never want to talk to in person, would never have friends. The most psychopathic, parasitic behavior is rewarded on social media. Jordan Peterson had a great point where he's like, the people that are most successful on social media are by far the worst people to be around in person, and it's a marker of mental illness. So the people that are attacking you, like I got on there and I was like, this is the ugliest shit I've seen. Like, and
yes.
None of these people have medical degrees. They have no PhDs. They don't do clinical research. And yet they feel, because they've somehow been gathered this, like, I think everybody has a desire to say what they want, like free speech.
Right. Absolutely.
But
yes.
You have to weigh people's opinions and experts. I think like not everybody is weighed the same. I mean, I played in the NFL for 10 years. When I listen to people talking about football, they don't know what the fuck they're talking about. And I hear them and I'm like, you didn't do this job. I do jujitsu. I am a crappy blue belt. My coach, Shanji Habero, 20-time world champion. He's a fucking expert on jujitsu. Victor Hugo. Right. So there's experts and people that you default to because they know what the fuck they're talking about. And to see the people attacking you on Twitter is like nauseating. Like, I'm like, what the fuck is going on in this world?
Everybody is an expert, right? Everybody's an expert in the microbiome.
They're not.
Right?
They're not.
Right. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Sarcastically. I mean, I said that.
Yeah.
And I always think like this. So my biggest joke on Twitter, or X now, is basically I say, what's your bifidobacteria level? Because I wonder, these people are probably lacking microbes. That's why they are who they are. That's why they're probably on X, all day long, waiting to create, stir up shit, as I like to call it. But, if you're like, coming at me, you better know your shit, is what I say.
No, so, you're on it. You're heavy. You fucking bring a big punch. If we're going to post a link and I'll share. I send everybody your QR code on how to get tested. Everybody I know that's in my Rolodex, I've recommended, like, sent your stuff, like, get tested. Just because I'm fascinated.
As long as they understand it's a clinical research.
Yes.
And they're part of a clinical research.
Yeah. So I was talking to you about my buddy Casey that just had his cecum and his appendix removed from cancer, 23 rounds of chemo, and he's come through. He asked me, he's like, how do I repopulate my gut? And I'm like, I'm not the right guy, but I know the right person. So I sent him your stuff.
Right.
And this is a pandemic. I mean, it's not even a pandemic. It's like a global health crisis. And like, it's a global crisis. I agree. If I handed you the keys to the castle, like you're the keys, here's the keys to the kingdom. How would you solve this health crisis? Is it start with bifidobacteria?
Yeah, I would start with bifidobacteria. I would make people aware of the importance of bifidobacteria. Again, this is not a consumer product. What we're doing, it's just research. But I think by doing meetings like the Malibu Microbiome, attracting doctors to come to the platform to basically learn is how we're going to move this. Because my interest is really training the physicians and giving power back to our physicians. Think about it. When you are sick, we've lost our physicians. Our physicians are struggling. They cannot know about a patient in that 10 minutes that insurance companies are paying them. And the patient is so complex, right? Some patients have trauma. Some patients have been raped. Some patients are using drugs. How are you supposed to know all this in that 10 minutes, right? So we need to empower our doctors, because unfortunately our doctors are stuck in the box because the box is comfortable, because the box has no liability. You follow the guidelines, you're going to be fine. And therefore you're not going to go against it. That's why a lot of doctors were very were following on vaccinating people. That's why a lot of doctors were following and not giving ivermectin, because they were in that comfort zone of, hey, if you listen to the government, you're going to be fine and you're not going to lose your license. Okay. Very few doctors have what it takes to do what I did, which is basically write a protocol with the FDA. Listen, when the agencies came into my office and, they said, we could stay a year, I said to them, no problem, but you're going to pay rent. I have nothing to hide. When the Department of Health came to my office, I said, look, you could take away my license, but the bottom line is I did everything by the book to conduct clinical trials with the FDA watching. So I have a right to treat patients, right? So, and ultimately, nobody can stop me from doing research. It's my money that I'm putting on my research. Nobody can stop that. They can take away my license, but they can't stop me from doing research. So very few doctors are in my position where they have a portal with the FDA and they could write protocols. And so we need to encourage those doctors to do what I did, to develop the relationship with the FDA, to write protocols, to innovate, and to do it the right way so that the FDA follows and we can create innovation again in medicine. Innovation is stopping when it's the price of a stock that dictates the innovation, right? We need to continue the innovation, even if the innovation affects the price of that stock, okay? Because ultimately the person in charge of the stock is going to be a patient.
Yeah.
And now he's going to say, I shoulda, coulda, woulda. The reason I stepped in with my finances and everything, and I thank God every day that he allowed me and he, got me to this level that I'm able to do that. Not every doctor has the ability. And literally yesterday, I forget who I was saying this to, but I said, listen, ultimately, when we looked at COVID in the stools at the beginning of the pandemic, the cost of doing a pipeline and validating the pipeline to just look for COVID in the stools by whole genome sequencing was close to $125,000. How many people are willing to spend $125,000 not knowing that they're going to find something? My scientist warned me and said, I think you're wasting money and you're going to throw $125,000 down the drain because you're not going to find anyone to have COVID in the stools. When we found COVID in the stools in 100% of people that had COVID, that was the beginning. Imagine if I was scared, or if I looked at money and said, you know what, I should not be spending the $125,000, right? But how many people are capable of doing that on a principle to see the truth? Not many, because the majority of people are bought. The majority of people are, how can I make money? There's more to life than making money. There's life. There's quality of life for your children. So if you're in a position that you're in the position, ask yourself, what did I do to get into that position? What can I do to give back so that I get back? That's really, if you look at any religion or anybody that follows God, that's what it's all about, right? Give back so you can receive. That's what we do. That's what we have to do as good human beings.
A wise man once said, be the change you want to see in this world. And you're being the change.
100%.
So, well, Doc, thank you so much for taking the time. I'm super excited about your event in Malibu. We'll cut that all up and kick it over to you. And hopefully we can get as many people there and put this podcast out and be able to spread this message because it's a powerful one. So I thank you for taking the time.
Thank you so much for having me.
And that's another episode of Power Athlete Radio. Hey there, Power Athlete Nation. Big shout out to all the heavy hitters who stuck around till the final whistle. If you've been soaking in the knowledge bombs and epic tales we've been dropping for free, here's your chance to be a game changer. Swing by ko-fi.com/powerathlete and toss a few bucks our way to keep the podcast fueled and firing on all cylinders. That's ko-fi.com/powerathlete. Your support makes a difference. See ya.